Last Delivery by Jackson. It was a chilly autumn morning when I set out on my usual paper route. The leaves had just begun to turn, and the air carried a crisp, earthy scent that I always associated with the changing seasons. As I pedaled my bike down the familiar streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort in the routine of it all. My last stop was always Mrs. Margie's house, a quaint little bungalow at the end of Maple Street. She was an elderly woman who lived alone, and I always made sure to deliver her paper right to her doorstep. Over the years, we had developed a sort of unspoken bond. She would greet me with a warm smile and a cup of hot cocoa on particularly cold mornings, and I would make sure to save the best comics for her. That day, as I approached her house, something felt off. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of life from within. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. Concerned, I knocked a little louder, but still, nothing. After a few more attempts, I decided to leave the paper on the porch and head home. The next morning, I made my way down Maple Street, dreading the thought of not seeing Mrs. Margie's smiling face. As I neared her house, I noticed a police car parked out front. My heart sank as I watched two officers emerge from the house, their expressions somber. I approached cautiously, unsure of what to say or do. One of the officers noticed me and walked over. "Son, did you know Mrs. Margie?" he asked. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "She was my paper route customer. Is she okay?" The officer sighed heavily. "I'm afraid Mrs. Margie passed away yesterday. Neighbors reported not seeing her for a couple of days and called it in." I felt the color drain from my face as the officer's words sank in. Mrs. Margie, the kind old woman who had always greeted me with such warmth and kindness, was gone. Couldn't believe it. "Did she suffer?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The coroner believes it was a heart attack," the officer replied. "She likely passed peacefully in her sleep." I nodded, trying to find some comfort in those words. As the officers finished up and drove away, I approached the house, unsure of what to do. I couldn't bring myself to leave her paper on the porch, not after what had happened. I rang the doorbell one last time, hoping against all hope that she would answer. To my surprise, the door creaked open, and there stood Mrs. Margie, her face lit up with a smile. "Jackson, dear, I was wondering when you'd be by," she said, her voice as warm and welcoming as ever. I stared at her in disbelief, my mind racing. "Mrs. Margie, the police were just here. They said you passed away." She chuckled softly. "Nonsense, child. I'm as alive as can be. Now, come in and have a cup of cocoa with me. It's a bit chilly out there." I followed her inside, my legs feeling like jelly. The house was exactly as I remembered it, cozy and filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies. Mrs. Margie bustled about in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as she prepared our drinks. As we sat together, sipping our cocoa, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mrs. Margie seemed oblivious to the events of the previous day, chatting away about her garden and the latest gossip from the neighborhood. It wasn't until later that evening, when I was lying in bed, that the full weight of what had happened hit me. I had seen Mrs. Margie, had spoken to her, had even shared a cup of cocoa with her. But the police had said she was gone, that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was it just a dream? Or had I truly seen the ghost of Mrs. Margie, somehow still lingering in her beloved home? To this day, I'm not sure what to make of that encounter. I know what I saw and I know what the police told me, but the memory of Mrs. Margie's warm smile and the comforting scent of her home will forever be etched in my mind. Perhaps it was a final goodbye, a chance for her to say farewell to the young paperboy who would become a part of her life. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a glimpse into the mysteries of life and death that we can never fully comprehend. All I know is that I will never forget Mrs. Margie and the last delivery I made to her door. It was a moment that changed me, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, there is always a glimmer of hope and wonder in this world. The Roommate's Shadow by Lila. The summer of my sophomore year in college was supposed to be a time of fun and freedom. I had decided to stay at my friend Mia's townhouse while her roommate, Jenna, was away for an internship. Mia and I had been friends since freshman year, and I was excited to have a little getaway from the campus dorms. Little did I know, this summer would turn into a nightmare. The townhouse was cozy, with a small kitchen and a living room filled with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. The first few days were blissful. Mia and I spent our evenings watching movies, cooking dinner, and enjoying each other's company. But as the days passed, I began to notice something strange. It started with the shadows. I would often catch a glimpse of a figure out of the corner of my eye, standing just beyond the reach of the dim light in the hallway. I dismissed it as my imagination, a trick of the light, or perhaps the remnants of too many late-night horror films. But the feeling of being watched lingered, creeping into my thoughts like a cold draft. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft rustling sound coming from the living room. I paused, my heart racing. Mia had gone to bed hours earlier, and I was certain I was alone. I tiptoed down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. As I peered into the living room, I saw a figure standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. The figure turned slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a man, dressed in a black suit, his face obscured by shadows. I blinked, and he was gone, as if he had never been there at all. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I convinced myself it was just a figment of my imagination, a result of too many late-night snacks and horror movies. The next day, I mentioned the incident to Mia over breakfast. She laughed it off, saying the townhouse had a history of odd occurrences, but she didn't seem worried. "It's probably just the old pipes or something," she said, pouring herself another cup of coffee. "Don't let it get to you." But I couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept the lights on, hoping to ward off whatever was haunting the house. I told myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But deep down, I felt a presence, something dark lurking just beyond my reach. A few days later, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard the rustling again. This time, it was louder, like someone was moving around in the kitchen. I hesitated, my heart racing. Mia was at a party and I was alone. Gathering my courage, I stood up and walked toward the kitchen. As I entered, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I glanced around, but the kitchen was empty. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I turned to leave when I caught a glimpse of the man in the black suit again, standing at the end of the hallway. Panic surged through me, and I ran back to the living room, slamming the door behind me. I called Mia, my voice trembling as I recounted what had happened. "There's someone in the house, Mia. I swear I saw him again." Mia laughed, but her laughter was nervous. "You're just imagining things, Lila. It's an old house. It creaks and groans. Just relax. I'll be home soon." But I couldn't relax. I spent the rest of the evening on edge, jumping at every sound. When Mia finally returned, she found me curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow. "Okay, maybe we should do something fun to take your mind off it," she suggested. We decided to watch a movie, but halfway through, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know if I was just losing my mind. "Let's go check the attic," I blurted out suddenly. Mia raised an eyebrow. "The attic? Are you serious?" "Yeah, maybe there's something up there that explains all this," I insisted, my heart racing. With a reluctant sigh, Mia agreed, and we headed to the attic door. The stairs creaked ominously as we climbed, and the air grew colder with each step. I flicked on the light, revealing a dusty space filled with old furniture and boxes covered in cobwebs. As we searched through the clutter, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something unsettling about the attic, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. I rummaged through a box labeled Jenna's stuff and found an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at a picture of a group of friends, one of whom looked eerily familiar. "Wait, Mia, look at this," I exclaimed, holding up the photo. "Doesn't this guy look like the man I saw?" Mia leaned in, her eyes widening. "That's Jenna's brother. I think he passed away a few years ago in a car accident. My heart sank. Why didn't anyone tell me? Mia looked pale. I don't know. Jenna never talks about it. Suddenly, the temperature in the attic dropped, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, and I could hear a faint whisper, like someone calling my name. Panic surged through me, and I dropped the album, stumbling back toward the stairs. Let's get out of here, I shouted, and we hurried down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind us. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for any signs of the man in the black suit. Just as I began to drift off, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and I shot up in bed, heart racing. In the dim light, I saw him standing at the foot of my bed, his expression unreadable. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He raised a hand, and I felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. Help me, he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. Before I could process what was happening, he vanished, leaving me trembling in the darkness. I knew then that this was no ordinary haunting. The man in the black suit was Jenna's brother, trapped between worlds, seeking closure. The next day, I told Mia everything. We decided to reach out to Jenna, hoping she could help us understand what was happening. When we finally spoke to her, she was shocked but grateful. I felt him around, but I thought I was just imagining it, she admitted, tears in her eyes. Together, we held a small memorial for Jenna's brother in the backyard, lighting candles and sharing memories. As we spoke his name and honored his memory, I felt a shift in the air. The oppressive weight that had been hanging over the townhouse lifted, and I knew he had finally found peace. From that day on, the shadows in the townhouse faded, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. I learned that sometimes, the past lingers, and the shadows we see may be those who need our help to find their way home. The Whispering Walls by Finn. Moving into a new house is always a mix of excitement and anxiety, but when I stepped into my new home, a quaint Victorian-style structure at the end of a quiet street, I felt an overwhelming sense of possibility. The walls were a faded yellow, the floors creaked with character, and the large windows let in streams of sunlight that danced across the hardwood. It felt like a fresh start, a blank canvas waiting for my touch. However, as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something strange. It started with soft whispers that seemed to echo through the hallways at night. At first, I dismissed them as the wind playing tricks or the house settling. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. One evening, as I was unpacking some boxes in the living room, I heard the whispers again. They were faint but unmistakable, like a conversation happening just out of reach. My heart raced as I strained to listen, but the words were too soft to make out. I glanced around, half expecting someone to be standing behind me, but I was alone. Get a grip, Finn, I muttered to myself, shaking my head. It's just an old house. But the whispers continued. They became a nightly occurrence, always just as I was about to drift off to sleep. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself that I was simply imagining things. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the sound. I crept out of bed, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The whispers seemed to be coming from the hallway, so I tiptoed down the corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the end of the hall, I felt a chill in the air, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Help us, help us. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The words were clear now, and a sense of dread washed over me. I was about to turn back when I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. It was a small room I hadn't explored yet, and the whispers seemed to be emanating from within. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the dusty window. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that the walls were covered in old photographs and newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age. They depicted a family, a mother, a father, and several children, smiling and laughing in front of the house. But there was something unsettling about the images. The The family looked familiar, as if I had seen them before. I stepped closer to examine the clippings, and that's when I noticed the date on one of the articles. Tragedy strikes. Local family found dead in mysterious circumstances. My stomach twisted as I read the details. The family had lived in this house decades ago, and the article described how they had vanished without a trace. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind as if the walls themselves were alive with their sorrow. Help us! Help us! I stumbled back, my heart racing. I had to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of the room. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the darkness. It was a little girl, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help us." I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. I raced back to my bedroom, my mind racing with questions. Who were they? What had happened to them? And why were they reaching out to me? The next day, I decided to do some research. I visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. I learned that the family had been reported missing after their neighbors noticed they hadn't been seen for weeks. The house had remained empty for years, and rumors of hauntings had circulated among the townsfolk. As I dug deeper, I discovered that the family had been the victims of a tragic accident. They had been found in the basement, trapped after a fire had broken out in the house. The cause of the fire was never determined, and the case remained unsolved. I returned home that evening, my mind swirling with the stories I had uncovered. The whispers had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the family were still trapped within the walls of the house, seeking closure. Determined to help them, I gathered some candles, a notebook, and a few personal items that I felt could connect me to their spirits. That night, I set up a small circle in the living room, lighting the candles and placing the items in the center. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I want to help you." For a moment there was silence. Then, the whispers returned, swirling around me like a gentle breeze. I could feel their presence, a mix of sadness and longing. "Help us, help us." I closed my eyes, focusing on the energy in the room. "I know what happened to you," I said softly. "You don't have to be trapped here anymore. I can help you find peace." The temperature in the room dropped, and I felt a rush of air as if the spirits were gathering around me. I opened my eyes, and the shadows in the corners seemed to shift and dance. I could see the little girl again, her face clearer now, filled with hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a gentle caress. "We just want to go home." With that, I began to speak to them, recounting their story, acknowledging their pain and loss. I told them they were loved, that their lives mattered, and that it was okay to let go. The whispers grew softer, more melodic, as if the spirits were finally finding solace in my words. As I finished, the room filled with a warm light, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The shadows began to recede, and the whispers faded into silence. I knew then that I had helped them find closure. The next morning, I awoke to a bright sun streaming through my window. The house felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. I ventured into the hallway, and for the first time since moving in, there were no whispers, no shadows lurking in the corners. I smiled, knowing that the family had finally found their way home. The walls that had once whispered of tragedy now stood silent, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I realized that sometimes the past lingers, but with compassion and understanding, we can help those lost in the shadows find their way back to the light. The Forgotten Child by Mira. It was a warm summer evening when I arrived at the Johnsons' house to babysit their two children, Emma and Jake. I had been babysitting for them for years, and I loved spending time with the kids. They were full of energy, always eager to play games and tell stories. However, that night felt different. The air was thick with an unshakable tension, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As I settled in, I noticed that the house was unusually quiet. The children were already in bed, and Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had left for a dinner party. I flipped through a magazine in the living room, trying to distract myself from the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second echoing in the stillness. After a while, I decided to check on the kids. I tiptoed down the hallway, peeking into Emma's room first. She was fast asleep, her blonde curls spilling over the pillow. I smiled, feeling a wave of warmth at the sight. Next, I moved to Jake's room, and as I opened the door, I was met with an unexpected sight. Jake was sitting up in bed, wide awake, his eyes darting around the room as if he were searching for something. "Mira," he whispered urgently. "Did you hear that?" I frowned, stepping into the room. "Hear what, buddy?" He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The laughing. It's coming from the attic." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had heard stories about the attic in this house, how it was filled with old toys and forgotten memories, but I had never ventured up there, and the thought of it sent a shiver through me. "Jake, it's probably just your imagination. You know how your mind plays tricks on you at night." He shook his head vigorously. "No, Mira, I swear. It sounds like a little girl. She's laughing, and it's really creepy." I hesitated, glancing back toward the hallway. The attic door was at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. "Okay, let's go check it out together," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Jake climbed out of bed, and together we crept down the hallway toward the attic door. The old wood creaked beneath our feet, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed the door open, and a rush of cool air greeted us. The attic was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the room. As we stepped inside, I was taken aback by the sight. The attic was filled with dusty boxes, old furniture, and a collection of forgotten toys scattered across the floor. But what caught my attention was a small, ornate mirror hanging on the wall. It was framed in a delicate silver design, and despite the dust, it sparkled as if it had been polished recently. "Look at that," I said, pointing to the mirror. "It's beautiful." Jake, however, was focused on something else. "Mira, listen," he urged, his eyes wide with fear. I strained to hear, and there it was, the faint sound of laughter, echoing through the attic. It was high-pitched and childlike, sending a chill down my spine. I felt an inexplicable pull toward the mirror, as if it were calling to me. "Let's go back," Jake said, his voice trembling. "I don't like it up here." But I couldn't tear my gaze away from the mirror. I stepped closer, entranced by its beauty. As I peered into it, I gasped. Instead of my reflection, I saw a little girl, her face framed by dark curls, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She wore a faded dress that looked like it belonged to another era. "Help me," she mouthed, her lips forming the words silently. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed, turning to Jake. "There was a girl in the mirror." Jake's face paled. "What do you mean?" "I didn't see anything." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to get out of here," I said, backing away from the mirror. But as I turned to leave, the laughter grew louder, swirling around us like a whirlwind. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. I grabbed Jake's hand, panic rising within me. "Stay close," I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. The laughter morphed into a cacophony of whispers, filling the air with a sense of urgency. "Help us! Help us! Who are you?" I shouted into the darkness, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The whispers intensified, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the attic. The little girl appeared again in the mirror, her expression now one of desperation. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice echoing in my mind. "I'm trapped." "Trapped?" I echoed, my heart racing. "How can we help you?" She pointed toward a dusty trunk in the corner of the attic, her eyes pleading. I hesitated, but I knew we had to try. "Jake, stay here," I instructed, moving toward the trunk. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, urging me on. I knelt beside the trunk, my hands trembling as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, I found a collection of old toys, each one worn and faded. But beneath them, I uncovered a small, tattered diary. I opened the diary, and my heart sank as I read the first few lines. It belonged to the little girl who had lived in this house long ago. She wrote about her family, her friends, and the games they played. But the last entry sent chills down my spine. I'm scared. I can't find my family. I think they forgot me. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the truth. The little girl had been forgotten, left behind in the chaos of a tragedy that had taken her family away. She was trapped in the attic, her spirit lingering in the shadows, waiting for someone to remember her. "Jake," I called out, my voice breaking. "We have to help her find peace." He rushed over, peering into the trunk. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of determination. "We need to honor her memory. Let's gather her toys and say a prayer for her." Together, we carefully placed the toys back in the trunk, arranging them with care. I closed my eyes, focusing on the little girl's spirit. "We remember you," I said softly. "You are not forgotten. You deserve to be at peace." As I spoke, the laughter transformed into a gentle melody, filling the attic with warmth. The air shifted, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The little girl appeared in the mirror one last time, her expression now serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soft breeze. With that, the attic door creaked open, and the shadows began to fade. I turned to Jake, relief flooding through me. "Let's get out of here." We hurried down the stairs, the weight of the attic lifting from our shoulders. As we reached the living room, the atmosphere felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from the house. When Mr. and Mrs. Johnson returned, I recounted the night's events, my voice trembling with emotion. They listened intently, their faces pale as I spoke of the little girl and her forgotten story. "Thank you for helping her," Mrs. Johnson said, tears in her eyes. "We've always known there was something special about this house, but we never knew." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace. The little girl was no longer trapped in the attic. She had been remembered, and her spirit could finally rest. I closed my eyes, knowing that sometimes, all it takes to heal the past is a little compassion and a promise that no one will ever be forgotten. The Reflection by Theo. The summer before my senior year of high school was supposed to be a time of relaxation and adventure. I had just finished my exams, and with my friends scattered across various summer camps and vacations, I found myself with plenty of free time. My parents decided to take a short trip, leaving me home alone for the first time. I was excited to enjoy my newfound freedom, but little did I know that my summer would take a dark turn. The first few days were blissful. I spent my mornings sleeping in, my afternoons playing video games, and my evenings hanging out with friends. But as the days passed, I began to notice something strange about the house. It started with the mirrors. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye when I walked past the bathroom mirror. I would glance back, but nothing was there. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination. However, the feeling of being watched lingered, creeping into my thoughts like a shadow. One evening, I was getting ready for bed when I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. I stood in front of the bathroom sink, brushing my teeth, when I noticed a figure standing behind me. My heart raced as I turned around, but the room was empty. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. That night, I fell asleep with the bathroom light on, hoping it would chase away the unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest. As I lay in bed, I heard a soft whisper, barely audible but distinct. "Theo?" it called, echoing through the stillness of the house. I shot upright, heart pounding. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the sound of my own breathing. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, a remnant of a dream. But sleep eluded me, and I spent the night tossing and turning, the whispers haunting me. The next day, I decided to investigate. I rummaged through the attic, searching for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. Among the dusty boxes and old furniture, I found a collection of antique mirrors, each one more ornate than the last. I felt a strange pull toward them, as if they were calling to me. I brought one of the smaller mirrors down to my room. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate designs etched into the frame. I hung it on the wall opposite my bed, thinking it would add a touch of charm to my otherwise plain room. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mirror seemed to glimmer in the moonlight, and I found myself staring at it, entranced. As I gazed into the glass, I saw my reflection staring back at me, but something was different. My reflection looked off. There was a flicker of movement behind me, and I turned, but the room was empty. "Get a grip, Theo," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "It's just a mirror." But as the days went by, the whispers grew louder, and my reflection began to change. It became more animated, almost as if it had a life of its own. I would see my reflection smile when I wasn't smiling, or frown when I was happy. Felt like it was mocking me, taunting me with its eerie behavior. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the mirror, when I saw a figure standing behind me. I turned around, but again, there was nothing there. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, standing just behind my reflection, its face obscured in shadows. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure stepped closer, and I felt a cold breeze wash over me. It was a man, dressed in a black suit, his face hidden in darkness. I could feel his presence, a weight pressing down on me. "Help me," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The figure in the mirror grinned, its eyes glinting with malice. "You can't escape," it taunted, its voice a chilling whisper. I bolted from the room, my heart racing. I ran down the hallway, desperate to escape the nightmare that had taken hold of my life. I reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. "Let me out," I screamed, pounding on the door. But the house was silent, the only sound my frantic breathing. I turned back toward the hallway, and that's when I saw him again, the man in the mirror. He stood at the end of the corridor, his eyes locked onto mine. "You can't run from me, Theo," he said, his voice low and menacing. I felt a surge of anger. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. "I want to be free," he replied, his voice dripping with malice. "And you're going to help me." I backed away, my mind racing. I had to find a way to escape this nightmare. I remembered the antique mirrors in the attic. Maybe they held the key to breaking this curse. I sprinted back to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. I frantically searched through the boxes, hoping to find something, anything, that could help me. That's when I stumbled upon an old book, its pages yellowed with age. It was filled with tales of spirits trapped in mirrors, seeking revenge on those who disturbed them. As I flipped through the pages, I found a passage that caught my attention. It spoke of a ritual to free trapped spirits, but it required a sacrifice, a piece of the soul of the one who disturbed them. My heart sank as I realized what I had to do. I returned to my room, the mirror glimmering ominously in the moonlight. The figure was still there, watching me with a twisted grin. "You've come back," he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "And I know how to free you." "Do you?" he taunted, stepping closer. "You think you can save yourself?" "Yes," I replied, determination flooding my veins. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." I began the ritual, reciting the words from the book as the figure in the mirror writhed in anger. The air grew thick with tension, and I could feel the energy shifting around me. "You will pay for this," he screamed, his voice echoing through the room. But I pressed on, focusing on the light that surrounded me. I could feel the warmth growing, pushing back against the darkness. "You are not my reflection," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "You have no power over me." With one final incantation, the mirror shattered, the glass exploding outward in a burst of light. I felt a rush of energy surge through me, and the figure screamed, his form dissolving into the air. As the dust settled, I stood in the remnants of the mirror, breathing heavily. The whispers faded, and the oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted. I was free. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through my window, the remnants of the nightmare fading from my mind. I looked around my room, and for the first time in weeks, it felt peaceful. I had faced my fears and emerged stronger. From that day on, I learned to appreciate the beauty of my own reflection, no longer haunted by the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. The summer of my senior year would be one of growth and self-discovery, a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles we face are within ourselves. The Midnight Caller by Zara. The summer nights in my small town were usually quiet, filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. However, that peace shattered one fateful evening when I received a phone call that would change everything. It was an ordinary Thursday night, and I was lounging on the couch, scrolling through social media, when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was a number I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued, I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice casual. "Zara?" A familiar voice replied, sending chills down my spine. It was my grandmother's voice, but she had passed away 2 years ago. "Grandma," I stammered, my heart racing. "Is that you?" "Yes, dear," she said softly, her voice warm yet distant. "I need your help." I felt a mix of disbelief and fear. "How is this possible? You're gone." "I know, sweetheart, but I'm still here and I need you to listen carefully," she said, her tone growing serious. "There's something dangerous coming for you. You must be careful." I glanced around the dimly lit room, feeling a cold sweat trickle down my back. "What do you mean? What's coming for me?" "Just trust me, Zara. You have to protect yourself. Remember the locket I gave you? It holds a special power," she instructed, her voice fading slightly. "You must wear it always." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I really just spoken to my grandmother? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It had to be a prank or a glitch. But deep down, I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me. I rushed to my room and opened the jewelry box where I kept my grandmother's things. Among the trinkets and old photographs, I found the locket, a delicate silver piece with intricate engravings. I hadn't worn it since her funeral, but now it felt like a lifeline. I clasped it around my neck, feeling the cool metal against my skin. That night, I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I went to bed, but sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing again. My heart raced as I fumbled for it on the nightstand. The same unknown number flashed on the screen. I hesitated but answered, my voice shaky. "Hello, Zara." The voice on the other end was low and distorted, sending a chill down my spine. It was not my grandmother. "You shouldn't have listened to her." "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just someone who knows what's coming for you," the voice replied, dripping with malice. "You can't escape it." Panic surged through me. "What do you want?" "Just to remind you that the past never truly dies," the voice said, and then the line went dead again. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What did that mean? I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit around and wait for whatever was coming. The next morning, I decided to visit the local library to research anything related to my grandmother's past. I had always known she had a mysterious side, but I had never delved into it deeply. As I combed through old newspapers and records, I stumbled upon an article that caught my attention. It was an obituary for a girl who had gone missing in our town decades ago. The girl's name was Lily, and the details were hauntingly familiar. She had lived in the same house my grandmother had grown up in, and according to the article, she had vanished without a trace. The resemblance between the two was uncanny. They could have been sisters. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the article. My grandmother had never mentioned Lily, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection. I decided to dig deeper, searching for any clues that could explain the strange phone calls and the warning I had received. As I continued my research, I discovered that Lily's disappearance had been linked to a series of strange occurrences in the town. People reported seeing shadows lurking in the woods, hearing whispers in the night, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. The townsfolk had dismissed it as folklore, but the stories persisted. That night, I returned home, my mind racing with the information I had uncovered. I felt a sense of urgency to protect myself, but I also felt a strange pull toward the mystery of Lily's disappearance. I couldn't ignore the feeling that my grandmother's warning was tied to this girl's fate. As I lay in bed, I clutched the locket tightly, trying to find comfort in its presence. Suddenly, my phone rang again, and I answered without hesitation. "Hello, Zara." The distorted voice came through again. "You're getting closer, aren't you? Who are you?" I shouted, my voice filled with anger. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand," the voice replied, almost mocking. "The past is not finished with you yet. You must decide who you want to be." Before I could respond, the line went dead once more. Frustration bubbled inside me. I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting me. I couldn't let fear control my life. The following day, I decided to visit the woods mentioned in the articles. I had to see for myself if there was any truth to the stories. Armed with a flashlight and my grandmother's locket, I ventured into the dense trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves above. As I walked deeper into the woods, I felt a strange energy surrounding me. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped me. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, echoing through the trees. "Help me! Help me!" I followed the sound, my heart racing. The whispers led me to a clearing, where I found an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, but something compelled me to approach. As I stepped closer, I felt the locket grow warm against my chest. I pushed the door open, and the hinges creaked ominously. Inside, the cabin was dark and dusty, filled with remnants of a forgotten past. I scanned the room, and my eyes landed on a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. It was cracked, but I could still see my reflection staring back at me. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. "Help me! Help me!" I approached the mirror, feeling a pull toward it. I reached out to touch the glass, and as my fingers brushed against it, I saw a flash of a young girl's face, Lily. Her eyes were filled with fear and desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "You have to help me." I took a deep breath, realizing that Lily's spirit was trapped. The connection between her and my grandmother was stronger than I had imagined. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice steady. "Find my family," she pleaded. "They need to know what happened to me." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The midnight calls, the warnings. My grandmother had been trying to protect me and help Lily find peace. I nodded, determination flooding through me. "I will help you, I promise." As I spoke the words, the whispers began to fade, replaced by a warm light that filled the cabin. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, and the mirror shimmered with a soft glow. I knew I had to return to the town and uncover the truth about Lily's family. That night, I researched everything I could find about Lily's family. I discovered that her parents had never stopped searching for her, even after all these years. They had moved away, but they still held on to hope. I found their contact information and decided to reach out. The next morning, I dialed the number, my heart racing. An elderly woman answered, her voice shaky. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson?" I began, my voice trembling. "I'm Zara. I think I have information about your daughter, Lily." There was a long pause on the other end before she spoke. "What do you know?" I told her everything, the stories, the mirror, the whispers. I explained how I had felt Lily's presence and how she needed her family to know the truth. As I spoke, I could hear her breathing grow heavier, a mix of hope and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her voice. We never stopped searching for her. That evening, I met with Mrs. Thompson and her husband, sharing everything I had uncovered. They listened intently, their eyes filled with a mixture of grief and gratitude. I could see the weight of their loss in their expressions, but I also saw a glimmer of hope. As we talked, I felt the locket around my neck grow warm again. I knew that Lily's spirit was finally finding peace. The Thompsons were able to share their memories of her, and I could feel the connection between them growing stronger. In the weeks that followed, I helped the Thompsons organize a memorial for Lily. We invited the community, sharing her story and honoring her memory. As we gathered in the woods where she had vanished, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. That night, as the sun set and candles flickered in the soft breeze, I felt Lily's presence beside me. The whispers had faded, replaced by a gentle warmth. I knew she was finally free. From that day on, I carried the locket with me, a reminder of the bond between the past and the present. The midnight caller had turned out to be a guiding light, leading me to help a lost soul find her way home. And in doing so, I had discovered the true power of love, memory, and the importance of never forgetting those we have lost. The Uninvited Guest by Cole. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. My best friend, Liam, was throwing a party to mark the end of our freshman year in college. As I walked through the crowded house, music pulsing in the background, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. This was our chance to let loose, to forget about the stress of exams and papers, and just enjoy being young and carefree. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept catching glimpses of a strange man in the corner of the room, his face obscured by shadows. Every time I tried to get a closer look, he seemed to vanish, as if he were a figment of my imagination. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that it was just the result of too many drinks and the dim lighting. But as the hours passed, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I found myself constantly scanning the room, searching for the mysterious figure. Finally, I decided to mention it to Liam. "Hey, man, have you noticed anything weird going on tonight?" I asked, leaning in close to be heard over the music. Liam frowned, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "There's this guy I keep seeing in the corner," I explained. "He's kind of creepy looking, and every time I try to get a better look at him, he disappears." Liam laughed, shaking his head. "Dude, you've had one too many. I think you're seeing things." I sighed, knowing that Liam was probably right. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I decided to try and relax, to enjoy the party and forget about the strange man. But as the night wore on, the feeling of unease only intensified. I kept catching glimpses of the figure, always in the corner of my eye, always just out of reach. And then, one night, everything changed. It was a few weeks after the party, and I was home alone, studying for an exam. I had decided to stay in, to avoid the distractions of campus life and focus on my work. As I sat at my desk, the silence of the house was suddenly shattered by a loud crash. I jumped up, my heart racing. I knew I should call the police, but something compelled me to investigate. I crept down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As I approached the living room, I could hear the sound of heavy breathing, like someone was struggling to catch their breath. I peered around the corner, and there he was, the strange man from the party. He was sprawled on the floor, his limbs twisted at odd angles. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the sound. The man's head snapped up, and I found myself staring into his eyes. They were wild and unfocused, like those of a cornered animal. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, torn between my instinct to help and the overwhelming sense of fear that gripped me. But something in his eyes, some glimmer of humanity, compelled me to act. I knelt beside him, my hands shaking. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Stairs," he gasped, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. "Fell." I could see now that his leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and his face was bruised and bloodied. I knew I had to call for help, but something held me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than met the eye. I helped the man to his feet, supporting his weight as we made our way to the couch. He collapsed onto it, his eyes fluttering shut. I grabbed a blanket and draped it over him, my mind racing with questions. As I sat beside him, waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I noticed something strange. The man's suit, which had been pristine at the party, was now torn and stained. And there was something else. A faint scent, like the musty smell of an old house. I frowned, my curiosity getting the better of me. I leaned in closer, and that's when I saw it. A small silver locket, dangling from the man's neck. It was the same locket I had seen at the party, the one that had caught my eye for some reason. I reached out to touch it, and as my fingers brushed against the cool metal, a strange sensation washed over me. It was like a memory, but not my own. I saw flashes of a house, a family, a child's laughter, and then darkness. I jerked back, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's eyes snapped open, and he fixed me with a piercing stare. "You shouldn't have touched that," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Before I could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. The man's expression shifted, and he grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Listen to me, boy," he hissed. "You've seen too much. You need to forget what you saw tonight." I shook my head, my mind racing. "I don't understand," I stammered. "What's going on?" The man's eyes narrowed. "There are some things in this world that are better left alone," he said. "Trust me, you don't want to get involved." The sirens grew louder, and the man released his grip. He pulled himself to his feet, wincing in pain. "Remember what I said," he warned, before limping out the door. I sat there, stunned, as the paramedics rushed in. They checked me over, asking if I was all right, but I barely heard them. My mind was consumed by the strange encounter, by the man's cryptic words and the strange locket. In the days that followed, I tried to put the incident out of my mind. I told myself that it was just a strange coincidence, that the man was probably just a drunk who had wandered into the wrong house. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. And then, one night as I was walking home from class, I saw him again. He was standing on the corner, his face obscured by the shadows. As our eyes met, a chill ran down my spine. He nodded, a grim smile spreading across his face, before turning and disappearing into the night. From that moment on, I knew that my life would never be the same. The strange man, the locket, the flashes of memory, it was all connected, and I was determined to find out how. I began to investigate, to dig deeper into the history of the house and the family that had once lived there. What I uncovered was a tale of tragedy and betrayal, of a family torn apart by dark secrets and dark forces. The locket, it turned out, was the key to it all, a talisman that held the power to unlock the veil between the living and the dead. And the man? He was the guardian, the protector of those secrets. He had been watching over the house for decades, making sure that the darkness that had once consumed it never escaped. But now, with my meddling, he knew that the balance had been upset. I knew then that I had to make a choice, to walk away and forget what I had seen, or to delve deeper into the mystery and risk being consumed by the darkness myself. It was a choice that would change the course of my life forever. In the end, I chose to fight. I knew that the stakes were high, that the forces I was up against were ancient and powerful. But I also knew that I couldn't turn my back on what I had discovered. Too many lives had been lost, too many souls trapped in the darkness. And so, I set out on a journey that would take me to the very heart of the mystery, to the place where the darkness had first taken root. I knew that I might not survive, that the price of victory might be my own life. But I also knew that I had to try, for the sake of those who had come before me and those who would come after. In the end, the battle was fierce and the cost was high. But in the end, the darkness was vanquished, and the souls that had been trapped were finally set free. And as I stood there, surrounded by the ruins of the old house, I knew that I had found my true calling, to be a guardian, a protector of the light in a world that was all too often consumed by the darkness. From that day on, I dedicated my life to the fight against the forces of evil, using the knowledge I had gained and the power of the locket to keep the darkness at bay. And whenever I felt the weight of the burden growing too heavy, I would remember the strange man on the corner, the guardian who had sacrificed everything to keep the world safe. In the end, we are all guardians in our own way. We all have a responsibility to fight against the darkness, to stand up for what is right and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And if we are willing to make the sacrifice to put everything on the line for the greater good, then we can make a difference, one battle at a time.